Hi, everybody. This is Joanne with Read Science, and today we are going to be talking of animal conservation, and we will be looking at the already sadly extinct passenger pigeon and the cheetah, who we are hoping will not become extinct. I'm joined today by my co-host, Jeff Schomeyer, who I see you are muted. Did you do that, Jeff?
Yep, it's fine.
Okay. And so joined here by Jeff and very special guests from California. We have our very first return guest, Susie Eszterhas, who is a wildlife photographer, and also Dr. Laurie Marker, who is now sitting in Namibia as we speak. And I will introduce these two ladies after I briefly introduce a couple gentlemen from Chicago who are on Team Passenger Pigeon. And this is Joel Greenberg, an author of a book called Feathered River Across the Sky, and documentary producer David Mrazek. And Jeff will do a fuller introduction of these gentlemen. Right now I'd like to have everybody just say hi really quickly, and I will do a fuller introduction of the ladies.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Happy to be here. Pleased to meet you.
So thanks for everybody for tuning in. And right now I'm going to just actually read your book blurbs, ladies, if that's all right. So Dr. Laurie Marker is the founder and executive director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund and has been studying cheetahs since 1974. She was one of the scientists that collaborated on the landmark discovery of the cheetah's reduced genetic diversity and began her research on cheetahs in Africa in 1977. After setting up the Cheetah Conservation Fund in 1990, she moved to Namibia in 1991 to develop an international center for cheetah research and education. In 2000, she was honored as one of Times Magazine's Heroes for the Planet and has received many other prestigious awards, including the 2010 Tyler Prize for the Environment and the 2013 ICCF Good Stewardship Award by the International Conservation Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C. Wow, by intimately living with and studying cheetahs for nearly 40 years, Laurie's perspective adds depth of understanding of cheetahs is matchless. She holds a doctorate of philosophy from University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. So Laurie, we are so honored to have you here. And just by reading your book, I can tell you have such a breadth of knowledge about the entire species. So we're really glad you could join us.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here, and hope everyone wants to read our book. It's just beautiful, and it was fun to work on as well. A Future for Cheetahs, and it's a different book, I think. It's something that talks about hope, what we know about the cheetah, and what the hope is for them.
Yep, and this beautiful book would not be possible without Susie Eszterhas. And she is a professional wildlife photographer based in California. She specializes in documenting the family lives of endangered species and is well known for her unprecedented work with newborn animals. Her images are published in books, magazines, and newspapers all over the world, including, well, if I read this list, we'll be here all day. Everywhere you can find animals, Susie's pictures are published. She is the author of a children's book series of 8 titles about wildlife called Eye on the Wild, and that's why we had you here last time, Susie. In fact, my 18-year-old daughter, she said, "Oh, that book must be by the lady who did the baby animal books." She remembers you. So anyway, Susie has won numerous awards and is represented by the world's leading natural history agencies. She's on the road for many months a year, undertaking commissions and leading instructional photography tours and workshops everywhere, from the poles to the tropics. So as we said, welcome back, Susie.
Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure.
So, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to introduce Team Passenger Pigeon, and then we will ask some proper questions about this topic.
Uniquely, we know precisely when the passenger pigeon became extinct. The last known of her species, a resident of the Cincinnati Zoo named Martha, died about 1 p.m. on September the 1st, 1914. And a mere 100 years previously, 40% of all North American land birds had been passenger pigeons, which just amazes me. They were thought to be an inexhaustible resource, they were hunted in great numbers, and they were totally exterminated in only a few decades. Documentary filmmaker David Mrazek wrote, "Several years ago, I met author and naturalist Joel Greenberg, a guy who is seriously passionate about the natural world. He told me the story of the passenger pigeon. He was writing a book about the bird. For centuries, they numbered in the billions, but then they disappeared in a geologic heartbeat. The centennial anniversary of their extinction would be in 2014. I was hooked. I had to make a film about this bird." Joel Greenberg's book became A Feathered River Across the Sky, the passenger pigeon's flight to extinction, and he figures very prominently in the film directed by David Mrazek that they both co-produced and co-wrote, called From Billions to None, the passenger pigeon's flight to extinction, which tells the compelling story of Martha and her kind and their disappearance from the face of the earth. The film also told me that Joel drives a car with a bumper sticker that reads, "Ask me about my passenger pigeon," which is something we plan to do. We're very pleased to have both David Mrazek and Joel Greenberg joining us today from Chicago. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Thanks very much. It's an honor.
And now, Joanne, get us started on this conservation topic.
Yeah, well, first, I find it very interesting. So as an author or a scientist, you could merely write a book and work on getting it out there. But both of you have ended up working with artistic people, with a photographer, with a documentarian. So I'd love to hear how you met and how the collaboration started, and what you feel the role of this extra element adds to your message. So I'll start with Team Cheetah, if that's okay.
I think Susie has a cute story on how we met, and Susie, whether you want to talk about that, but I think that the pictures that Susie's taken illustrate my story so well on cheetahs. So Susie, you want to just tell a little bit? I think it's fun.
Yeah, so when I was, our journey together started quite a long time ago. It was about 10 years ago. And I had a dream of photographing a cheetah family following some cubs from infancy to adulthood. And so I contacted Laurie, of course, because Laurie is the leading expert on cheetahs. So you look for cheetah researcher, and it leads you to Laurie. So I went, she was having an event, and I essentially just went to her event and stalked her. And I did. I waited all night to talk to her. She's a very busy lady, of course. And I asked her, at the time, actually, the dream that I had was, it was for a magazine piece, not really a book. We kind of decided on the book project a little bit later. And we decided, it was great because she, to her credit, really believed in me. I was just this young woman who was like, yeah, I want to go to Africa and photograph cheetahs. And I had spent a lot of time in Africa prior to that, so it wasn't that outlandish. But so we decided to start this journey together, and I wound up going and working in Kenya. So for most of the photos there, I worked on my own in a bush camp for about 3 years and just followed various different cheetahs. And then, of course, I visited Laurie in Namibia a few times to photograph her with her cheetahs and her doing her conservation work. So that's kind of how we kind of came together. It's been a great friendship and also a great collaboration and a long period of working together.
And then I think a lot of it culminated around we did an article together in the Smithsonian that highlighted some of the pictures that Susie had taken, and that started us launch into really, well, why don't we pursue this more? Why don't we tell the story about the cheetah? And, not just my story personally, but the story of how I see the future of the cheetah can go. And we went back and forth on that because, Susie said, well, my pictures are beautiful, and you're this heavy scientist, we don't want to bore people with that. And I said, well, I'll try to make the words in such a way that will will highlight. But I think there's a lot of pretty picture books out there. And I think what makes our book different is the fact that we have a story to tell, and it's not somebody else's story. It is the Cheetah Conservation Fund story. It's my research, our research, and to be able to tell it with the pictures that are there. And our work is not just studying the cheetah, it's developing conservation strategies that are going to lead to its future survival.
Well, you give us, Laurie, a big picture, if you'll pardon the pun, and the pictures do more than just illustrate that. The whole book together gives us a very large panoramic look at the idea of conservation, how, beyond sort of belly aching about not killing these animals, you tie in lots of things that I hope we have a chance to get to that have to do with the education of young girls, farmers living with things, sustainable living, so many things that come together with beautiful pictures that help tell the story and digestible but scientifically precise text. That's an achievement, I think.
Thank you. Susie and I are both very proud. So.
Yeah, we are.
And we heard a little bit about the beginning of Joel and David's collaboration. In fact, I was curious because my impression was this book about the passenger pigeon was written, and you wrote it so that its arrival, its release would coincide with the 100th anniversary of the death of the last known passenger pigeon. So I sort of thought the book came out first, and then this documentary was made based on the book. But I heard you reference David in the book from the thing. So I'm curious the timing of how your collaboration began.
Well, the collaboration began some years ago, even before this, and maybe David can talk about. He initiated it in a different context.
So I sought out Joel because of a book he wrote several years ago called The Natural History of the Chicago area, the Chicago region, and it's this really great, comprehensive documentation of how much Chicago and the Midwest has changed from being a place where you had bears and wolves very close to what is presently downtown Chicago, and an ocean of prairie, heading out west, literally just as far as you could see, just something so awesome that people can't imagine it today. And so I sought him out because I was interested. I wasn't sure exactly how, but I wanted to make a documentary about how the natural landscape has changed so drastically in Chicago. Chicago is a city that grew so quickly and changed the landscape. And so I started filming him at various remnant prairies around here, little slivers of prairie that haven't changed for thousands of years, but that most people don't know about, that still exist. And then he got a contract to write a book on the history of the passenger pigeon, and asked me if I thought it was an interesting topic for a documentary, and I said absolutely. And then that began our collaboration on the film. So really, his writing of the book and the making of the film was concurrent.
Since we're talking about visuals and the science together, one thing that was very striking in the film was, and could you recount for us John James Audubon's encounter with a flock of passenger pigeons, what he saw, and then tie that to the remarkable animation, which is just one of the many that you were able to use in the film. So
yeah.
Effective.
Sure. There are many accounts of passenger pigeons darkening the skies and over the major cities of eastern U.S. and Canada. You don't have to go to remote areas. One account that is arguably unique because it doesn't talk about darkening the sky for hours, but for 3 days. And that's John Audubon, who had a shop, lived in Henderson, Kentucky on the Ohio River, and one spring day he traveled to Louisville to conduct business, and over the course of that time, he said, the birds eclipsed the sun. He said the droppings fell like snowflakes. And so, that kind of imagery seemed to me to lend itself well to cinematic treatment, and that was one reason why really reached out to David and gave him information and engaged him in this collaboration on the film.
Yeah, and so that was one of the first. It's such a amazing depiction of something that people can't imagine, and that was experienced by a lot of people. It was a natural phenomenon that was part of this continent, and now it's like a special effects scene in a movie, and something that did happen. And so I realized we really wanted to depict that. The challenge was to be able to do it with a limited budget, because it was a challenge to raise enough to do justice to it. So I sought out a media arts academy here in Chicago that is teaching young people animation, among other things, filmmaking, and they were really interested in creating, as part of classroom activity, this phenomenon which you see in the film. So we actually took high-resolution photographs of some specimens from the Peggy Notebart Museum here. There are a lot of specimens that exist in museums across the country and in places around the world, and took one, cloned that using software that they created for Finding Nemo, with all the fish, the schools of fish in that film, and then we came out with this pretty amazing depiction of Audubon's, what it might have been like to experience that.
Well, we humans seem to have this problem imagining how the numbers line up, how we could have any impact at all. People at the time you reported, are writing about how you could never kill off the passenger pigeon. There are so many billions of them. It is just impossible. And yet we have the fact that passenger pigeons have maybe one chick a year, maybe two. This is not sustainable. And when you kill them by the tens of thousands. And I was shocked when you tell me that worldwide today we kill, 11,000 sharks an hour. It's like, how can there be so many people killing so many things? How do we get people to realize that this number may be huge, but this number is also huge, and we can wipe these things out?
Well, the pelagic fishing, I think, is a very good contemporary analog to the pigeon, and it really there's a factor in common in both of those. Prior to 1900, there was no federal law in the United States to protect the commons, to protect migratory birds. States could do it, but another state might not. Concomitantly or similarly, with the open oceans, no sovereign can dictate regulations. So there has to be agreement, and as Dr. Worms in our movie says, there is an example of the world agreeing, and we have to hope that that attitude might still exist in saving life in the seas.
And Laurie, I'd love to hear what you have to say about cheetahs, because there's not a billion cheetahs, but there were more.
There's only 10,000 cheetahs in the world right now. And in the 1980s, the farmers in Namibia killed about 10,000 cheetahs in 1 year. We've seen a decline of the population from about 100,000 cheetahs to 10,000 in the last 100 years. So it's been a 90% decline, and primarily it's all at the hands of humans. From these days, it really revolves around human-wildlife conflict. The fact that farmers perceive cheetahs and other predators to be a threat, that the cheetah is a daytime hunter, is seen by farmers as it's not an aggressive animal, and it's easy to track down, it's easy to catch, and it's easy to kill. So when we found this out in the middle 70s, I kept saying to somebody everywhere, we've got to do something about the wild cheetah. And with that, that's why I really set up a foundation, was to work with the people on the ground who were perceiving this animal to be a threat and thinking that there were thousands of them. And from that, have helped educate our country of Namibia, many of the other range countries throughout Africa, and people worldwide, that here the fastest land animal, the cheetah, has a very, very small number remaining. And those 10,000 are found through 24 African countries, and the last remaining of the Asian cheetahs are found in Iran, where there's only about 40 to 70 of them. So we're talking about very small pocket populations, many which are probably breeding to extinction. And from that, we don't want the cheetah to go by way of the passenger pigeon. The cheetah is a part of the Migratory Species Act now. Thank goodness there is a international act, but it still doesn't actually stop people from killing the cheetah. So what I always say is we have to change the world very rapidly if we're going to save animals like the cheetah and many of the other endangered species that are on Earth and very special to most of the people who are aware of them. But most are not aware of these threats, and the threats are not within people's minds, and yet in Africa they are, and they are changeable through a lot of education. But today in the world we've got 7 billion people. Our sub-Saharan African population, where the cheetah lives, are about 1.2 billion people, and that population is going to expand exponentially in the next coming 20 to 30 years. So the cheetah is even at greater risk because of the population and the economic issues facing most of the people where the cheetah is living as well.
And when I was going through all the resources and comparing the two, like anthropogenic influence, human-made influence on animals is very seldom just one thing. It's so complex. There's so many different factors playing into this. I mean, I felt like I learned so much from the passenger pigeon book. I was like, I had no idea it was this, complex and varied. And of course, the cheetah, as I'm reading, of your efforts to even give dogs, to train dogs that can guard people's, flocks, their domesticated animal flocks, from cheetahs, so that the cheetahs, stay away. I mean, your help is just surprising to me. I was like, I never thought of that. What an idea. Instead of just saying, don't kill the cheetah, this is not good for the, overall balance. I mean, you're actually giving them actionable things to do. But for the passenger pigeon, it just sort of came too late, even though there were voices trying to interject. So I don't know if I have a question with that, but interesting if either of you want to start talking about the anthropogenic influences, that are probably most significant.
One thought is the role of technology. So technology, and we can see it as a positive and negatives. The negative could be fairly obvious with passenger pigeons. It was the introduction and expansion of the railroads and telegraph that expanded the capacity to know where the birds were, and the railroad meant you could then ship it to large markets. But there wasn't the technology to say that, the pigeons have decreased. As late as 1882, there were 4 small nestings of 1 million each. That sounds like a lot of birds, but 4 years before that, there were tens of millions. And so, Laurie has an advantage with cheetahs. I mean, we know where they are, and you can say that there are only a few thousand. We have the capacity to monitor numbers and make the point that you may see a lot in that one tiny place that you are, but overall this is an animal that's decreasing. And so that didn't exist in the 19th century. So with technology it could facilitate conservation efforts, and on the other hand it could hinder it.
And then go ahead.
Well, it just tells such an amazingly sad story of a species that was so abundant. And 100 years ago, both of us are comparing populations over 100 years of what we didn't know, and yet this animal did go extinct. Martha was just a reminder, the last remaining bird of the Cincinnati Zoo, of the roles of zoos that they play through education in the public. But the public's mind, to grasp what the loss of that kind of a number of a species is. It's still amazing to me that we're losing migratory birds on a regular basis. That I guess we need to be even louder voices. So I'm just excited that you made the movie that you did, as well as the book, because not everybody will read a book. I think movies can maybe get out to more and more people as well. That we need to spread the word so far and wide that that was 100 years ago, but we're in a very large mass extinction today.
Well, one other thing that thank you, and that follow up on what Laurie just said. The movie and the book were sort of among the earlier aspects of this larger project, Passenger Pigeon. The goal of all this was to use the 2014 anniversary as a way, as to use it as a teaching moment, to tell this remarkable story in as many ways as possible. So we did engage artists. There's been dances created and plays created and numerous visual arts and you name it. A farmer in Ohio created a corn maze in the shape of a passenger pigeon. So to try to tell, to follow on that, Laurie, to try to talk as loudly and in as many voices as possible to engage as many people, to at least get them to start thinking about it and hopefully actually take actions following that.
What makes Martha such a good ambassador for extinction awareness, or the passenger pigeon? I have to say this because I was so happy with the idea of a spoke species. What makes the passenger pigeon such a good spoke species for this?
Well, I mean, what makes Martha, and I don't know, there are other organisms. There's a palm on Mauritius that I saw years ago. It's the only living member, and there are, I think, some frogs and other critters that there's one left. But the fact that there was this one individual certainly adds poignancy to the story. It's interesting how human beings react to small groups or individuals differently than in masses. So you may recall some years ago when a small pod of gray whales were stuck in the ice up in Siberia, and Russia actually sent naval vessels to rescue them. This is the same time Russia was engaged in whaling. I mean, we make these distinctions, and so to have this bird, this individual, I think really adds a lot of power to the story.
And if we had...
It has a name as well. So having a name, I think, has huge benefit.
Yeah.
People
Absolutely.
can relate to it.
Especially the name, named after Martha Washington. I mean, it's such a strange juxtaposition. And then there was George. There was Martha and George died a couple of years earlier. But if we hadn't had Martha to kind of put this literal face to this otherwise, this species of billions, I think it's a harder story to tell because were so many. And one challenge that we had, I mean, when I would talk to friends at a party and they'd say, oh, what are you working on? And I would say the story of the passenger pigeon, and people consistently confuse it with the carrier pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
They just it's very hard to realize, oh, it's a separate species. But some of the reaction from people when I would tell them this pigeon went extinct, some people would say, well, what was wrong with that? Because pigeons have this kind of, with many people, bad reputation. They're dirty, city pigeons. And it's, to be able to put a face on this species that went extinct was important.
It's interesting. Maybe they have different friends than I do. My friends tend to be birders and bird people who get it. And but it's important to be able to explain and answer those questions and to get. And I'm sure, Laurie, you deal with that too. Although cheetahs are pretty charismatic, but trying to get people to care about these animals, you need to present it in as many ways as possible.
And that was a challenge, partly because we weren't in the film. We're not saying we wish these billions of birds were back in the skies today, it would be untenable. We wouldn't have commercial aviation if we had this biomass in the sky. The point is, look at what we did. Look at what we were capable of doing not that long ago, and we're doing it now. We're doing it in the oceans. I mean, we use cod as an example in the film, and even though there are ghost towns up in Newfoundland and that used to be fishing towns because cod just depleted so badly so quickly. Cod fishermen, now that they're seeing, oh, there are areas in the North Atlantic or in the Mid-Atlantic that are showing revived fish, they're just a few areas, and they're once again pushing. We need to be able to fish the way we were fishing before, or without these limits. And it's like, don't they see that you've got to be more responsible about your fishing?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I feel with that, and we tried to put it in our book as well, is that, you know, it's sad. The cheetah is the fastest land animal, but the majority of the world thinks it's a leopard. So most people don't even know what it is. And then with that, you know, most people don't think about the animals the same way, obviously, I do, and we all do, and spending the time that we do. We're very, very unique and lucky that we have these opportunities. And yet I think that really people aren't going to change unless we get policy to change and we get consumers and businesses to all tie in together. And as much time as we can spend saying, look at the problem, I think we need to spend so much more of our time saying the solutions are actually the people who are the problems. And with that, we've looked at certification. We believe that consumers should know what they're buying and how they're involved in the choices that are actually causing many of our species to go extinct. And cheetahs are a predator, and predators eat meat, and so do humans. And yet, I don't think most people tie in the fact that most of the meat that we eat are killing all of our predators. And yet, we don't want people to be astonished. What we want them to do is to support ecosystem-friendly stewardship farmers. So, again, people are problems, but I think that we need to be directing ourselves into finding solutions around these horrible problems that we just are facing. And, Martha is just a prime example of the fact that we've got to go a different way.
Well, this is a vital part of what Susie photographs are doing in this book, right? Susie is showing us, instead of writing about the cheetah, you're showing us individual cheetahs. We see families, we see cubs, we see identifiable animals who are individuals, and we respond more readily to that, don't we?
Right, and actually, before you say something, Susie, this picture, I don't know if you guys could appreciate this through this media.
Yeah.
Lone cheetah sitting here, and it said, "Where did all the prey go?" And I immediately got shivers, and I mean, because this image, just captured that, little headline there. Where did all the prey go? So what is the cheetah going to eat? But the solitary cheetah sitting there is beautiful. What an image! I mean, this whole book is just packed with amazing photos. But yeah.
Well, as I'm sitting here listening to you guys talk, one of the things I'm thinking about is that. We haven't mentioned yet prey loss, and one of, in East Africa, that is the biggest thing that's affecting cheetahs is prey loss and habitat loss. And so for the cheetahs I worked with in East Africa, it's very different than Laurie's cheetahs in Namibia, where she's dealing mostly with livestock farming. But in East Africa, we're dealing with, one, pastoralists, but two, also people who are still doing a lot of hunting for meat, and there's a huge commercial meat trade in the areas where I worked. I remember, you talk about the passenger pigeon clouding the sky for 3 days. The first really big wildebeest crossing that I saw in the Masai Mara, I was over the moon because it was 3 hours long, and I'd heard that most crossings were 20 to 40 minutes, and the crossing I saw was the first of the season. It was a feeding frenzy with crocodiles. It was 3 hours long. And I was so ecstatic, and I saw an older gentleman that I was friends with that night, and he said, 3 hours is great. This used to go on for 3 days. We had crossings. That would go for 3 days solid, and I just couldn't fathom it. I could not fathom the numbers that they used to have. And I think for cheetahs, you know, when I was working with these cheetahs, taking pretty pictures is the best part of my job, and I love doing that. And being with a cheetah from sunrise to sunset for months and months with the same cheetah is a really very profound experience. But what's also equally as important is, you know, photographing some of the darker stuff. You know, I started to realize as I was working in the Mara, my God, poaching is going on under my nose all the time. And, you know, I'd come back to camp and the rangers would talk about catching, you know, 13 poachers on Ingarari Hill. And I'm like, well, Jesus, I was on Ingarari Hill with my cheetah family. And, you know, you don't realize as a tourist or even as a photographer living there, you don't realize how much of the prey is going with the predators as well, and how this is really, it's catastrophic. And this isn't an area where animals are supposedly protected, where there are anti-poaching teams, you know, and where tourists go and think these animals are living in the safe haven, and they're really not. So I think the imagery, obviously the imagery of the beautiful imagery is the most powerful to pull people in, because that's how you get them excited. Let's just face it, if we had a book about poaching, it doesn't sell very well, right? But to try to create some beautiful images that do move people, and then also, you know, to bring in some of the other aspects as well. Some of the touching photos of Laurie's with her ambassador cheetahs, you know, knowing that these cheetahs can't ever be returned to the wild, so now they're educational ambassadors. The photos of the dogs that are protecting the cheetahs, you know, it's all a big part of the story.
One of the most heartbreaking photos I saw was, I think it's out of South Africa, could even be Namibia, with a white rhino, and there are three guards, 3 armed guards.
Yeah.
I mean, any animal that requires 3 armed guards to keep it safe has a lot of problems facing it. And, you know, that image to me really said a lot. You know, at the end of the day, the poachers can probably outgun the 3 guards or pay them off. But, you know, you're right. There are these, you know, other factors. There's at least 4 principal anthropogenic causes of extinction currently, and between probably cheetahs and passenger pigeons, you know, all but maybe pollution or something are involved. So, you know, there are different degrees of complexity in trying to unravel the causes. But even abundant things can disappear in a heartbeat, and so something like cheetahs can go even quicker.
And to Laurie's earlier point about how we've got to get through to people to make people realize they're part of the problem, we don't want necessarily to make people feel, you can't just play the guilt card, but you have to, part of it I think is people feeling like it's such an insurmountable, not so much with, actually maybe not so much with cheetahs because there are very specific solutions, but with you know, species extinction overall and climate change, it just seems so overwhelming to people. But they have to realize people can make a difference. And look at McDonald's, their announcement just recently. They're going to, as a result of films like Food Inc. and much more awareness about how much antibiotics are being fed to cattle, they're changing the way they're going to be growing the beef that they are going to be serving as food. I mean, and it'll affect public health in terms of antibiotic resistance. I mean, there are a lot of other issues that still need to be worked on, but people can make a difference, and if enough voices are brought to bear, things can change, even things that people feel like are insurmountable.
You know, I have a photographer friend who talks about how people are becoming more imagery literate with social media and Instagram and things like that, and I think it's very true. The power of imagery has never been greater. And, you know, I just the other day watched India's Daughter, which is a very powerful BBC film about women's issues and rape in India. And things like that really do, I think, have the power alongside with, you know, researchers and experts. I think there's an incredible amount of resources that we can use to change the way people think about that.
And use the research that we've done to actually apply it into such a way that gets into the hands of the general public. And oftentimes science is more dry and people aren't that interested in the science side of it, but it has to be actually, sorry. You know, I study the cheetah genetics, and you know, nobody's all that interested in oh wow, they're really unique. They are and population that's remaining has come from just very small numbers. They escaped the Pleistocene extinction probably about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And so that all the cheetahs that we know today all look very, very much alike and very similar. But studying that doesn't save them. It gives us an understanding of how important the role of genes are in species health and their long-term survival. And so the cheetah's been an amazing science animal to study, to tell that story, to then say, adaptation to change is something that is going to affect not only an animal like cheetah, but everything else. And it kind of leads the way, but our science needs to be put into applied actions, I guess. What we know has to apply to people who can make a difference.
Right. And I know we're having a shortened read science, so this looks like a great time to have our sets of guests to say a last word and to promote your website or where people can get your resources or where they can connect to help. So why don't we start with the gentleman this time, and then we'll move on to the ladies.
Or tell us what we forgot to ask about.
Yes, that too.
Fabulous to be here. Would love to be able to continue this conversation longer, but the film is From Billions to None, and it is available at FromBillionsToNone.com, and it'll be airing on PBS World on Earth Day twice in the evening, and that's a channel that not every city across the country gets, but check your local listings, and it's right near your dial. There's no such thing as a dial anymore. Boy, I'm 8. It's right near your public television, your main public television station. And I just encourage people to go to the website. We have a variety of information about things you can do to make a difference, and realize that you as an individual absolutely can make a difference.
Well, A Feathered River Across the Sky, published by Greenberg, can be obtained. There's a paperback edition as well. It can be obtained by any book store, Amazon, whatever. There is a website called Project Passenger Pigeon, which can give you lots of information on passenger pigeons, where the nearest specimens are if you want to go see them. And pretty well document that from in Canada and the United States, and feel free to contact either David or me. If you write to the website, I'll get your queries, and it's been a real joy meeting the fellow panelists and the two hosts. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I read and I listened to Feathered River Across the Sky, and it was great. I mean, it was really, I learned so much. And indeed, I was one of those people who's confusing a carrier pigeon with a passenger pigeon. Shame on me, because I'm a biologist. You know.
Campbell, who did
not an ornithologist, though.
Did a very good job. It was very meticulous. We went over it word for word to make sure he got the pronunciations correct. So I think he did a fine job.
Great book, great book. So, Laurie and Susie?
Well, our book, A Future for Cheetahs, is available through our website, which is cheetah.org, which our website's very easy to remember. You can learn all about the other projects of the Cheetah Conservation Fund as well. The book is also available through Amazon, so A Future for Cheetahs. And just to let people know, in the U.S., I live in Namibia. People are welcome to visit us in Namibia at our Research and Education Center. So we welcome you. You can learn about all of our livestock guarding dogs and habitat and wildlife projects to save cheetahs. But also, I travel to the United States a couple times a year, and next week I will be heading to the United States, and I'll be in maybe a city around some of you during my travels. So I know I'll be in New York and Washington and California, and places in between, Texas, Oklahoma. So I'd love to meet anybody who's interested. the book is A Future for Cheetah, and it's got some of the most beautiful pictures in the world, and you can learn all about this most amazing, fastest land animal.
That's wonderful. Susie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think just one thing that the book is also a fundraiser for CCF, which we're very proud of. So it's helping save cheetahs if you buy the book. And the other thing to mention too, I'm doing a special photo tour to South Africa and Namibia in 2016, and as part of it, I'll be taking a group of small photographers to Laurie's place in Namibia to get behind-the-scenes access with her cheetahs and running cheetahs. So it's a really great opportunity for people who are interested in big cat photography to join me in the field and to meet Laurie at the same time. And that is, the information is on my website for that tour.
Okay. Well,
so
thank you.
My thanks, Joanne, and then over to you. But just thanks everyone immensely for being here and having such a lively start to this conversation, which could go on for so long, and we hope that we find ways to continue that. Thanks very much, Joanne.
Yep, and I extend my thanks too. You guys are really good sports at all the planning, trying to get all of us together at once. But really, I hope we drive the point home that it's important to be aware of, what's happening with our ecosystems and Americans. I think of the passenger pigeons, so I think of Americans, but those are Canadians too. But humans' role in what we are doing. So thank you so much for all that you do and all the information you're putting out there in many different ways. And I'm really glad you guys could join us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for joining us. And this will be up on YouTube forever and ever, or as long as
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Read
Nice
Science.
meeting you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.